Chapter 5. Tree Nutrition and Fertilization. Objectives. 1. Describe the essential elements that a tree requires and how these elements are absorbed. 2. Discuss the reasons for fertilizing urban trees. 3. Explain the various types of fertilizer and the advantages and disadvantages of each. 4. Describe the different methods of fertilizer application and the advantages and disadvantages of each. 5. Discuss the problems that can be associated with excessive fertilization and with leaching. 6. Explain why determining nutritional requirements and availability is the first step before making any fertilization recommendations. Introduction. Trees require certain essential elements to function and grow. An essential element, or nutrient, is a chemical constituent that is involved in the metabolism of the tree or that is necessary for the tree to complete its life cycle. For trees growing in forested sites, these elements are usually present in sufficient quantities in the soil and are recycled from fallen foliage. Landscape trees or urban trees, however, may be growing in modified soils or environments that do not contain a sufficient amount of available essential elements required for satisfactory growth and development. Nutrient-rich topsoil may have been removed during construction or may deteriorate over time. Nutrient cycling can be limited due to the removal of fallen foliage, which in turn will limit the population and activity of earthworms and soil organisms that help to break down those fallen materials. Therefore, it may be necessary to fertilize or to adjust the soil structure, biology, and chemistry to increase available nutrients in urban soils. Fertilizing trees can increase growth, reduce susceptibility to certain diseases and insect pests, and, under certain circumstances, help reverse declining health. However, if the fertilizer is neither needed nor applied wisely, it may not benefit the tree at all and may even adversely affect the tree and the environment. Trees growing in turf that is routinely fertilized may not require supplemental fertilization, depending on the fertilization regimen of the turf. In the United States, tree fertilization should be done in accordance with the ANSI A300 standards for fertilization, developed by the Accredited Standards Committee on Tree, Shrub, and Other Woody Plant Maintenance Operations. These standards are intended for use in preparing specifications for tree maintenance. ISA's Best Management Practices, Tree and Shrub Fertilization offers detailed information on how to apply the ANSI A300 standards. Specifications for tree fertilization should clearly define the objectives and identify the type of fertilizer, along with its application rate and timing, method, and location. Tree requirements. Trees take up essential elements dissolved in water through their roots. Each of the essential elements has a specific role in a plant and cannot be replaced by another element. Trees require certain elements, known as macronutrients, in relatively large quantities. Nitrogen, N, is often the most limiting macronutrient and the one required in the largest quantity. It is a constituent of proteins and chlorophyll and is critical to photosynthesis and other plant processes. Because soil nitrogen, under natural conditions, comes largely from decomposed organic matter, removing leaf litter and other natural sources of nitrogen can disrupt the cycling of nitrogen in the soil. Much of the nitrogen in the soil can be lost due to leaching or volatilization. Nitrogen deficiencies are most common in sandy soils low in organic matter, especially if irrigation is heavy. Nitrogen deficiency becomes noticeable through reduced growth, smaller leaves, and yellowing, chlorosis, of the older leaves. However, these symptoms could also be due to a variety of other problems that affect root health and element uptake. Because nitrogen is the macronutrient most likely to be deficient in trees, fertilization specifications usually focus on supplementing it. Other macronutrients, such as phosphorus, P, potassium, K, and sulfur, S, are also required in relatively large quantities. However, these elements are often present in adequate amounts in the soil. secondary nutrients, which are required in moderate quantities. Other elements, known as micronutrients, are required in smaller quantities and may actually be toxic at high levels. Nonetheless, a micronutrient deficiency can have profound effects on tree health. For example, iron chlorosis is a condition that results when trees are not absorbing sufficient quantities of iron, often because the iron in the soil is in a form that roots cannot absorb. Iron deficiency can eventually kill a tree. Like iron, manganese, Mn, and zinc, Zn, may at times be deficient in a tree. Chlorosis symptoms due to manganese deficiency are similar to those of iron deficiency. Trees deficient in zinc may have small leaves and stems that fail to elongate, rosetting. The remaining micronutrients molybdenum, copper, chlorine, nickel, and boron are less likely to be deficient. Fertilizer. Fertilizers are available in many forms and combinations. A complete fertilizer is defined as one that contains nitrogen, N, phosphorus, P, and potassium, K. The fertilizer analysis, listed on the container, expresses the composition of the fertilizer as a percentage by weight of total nitrogen, N, available phosphoric acid, P, O, and soluble potash, K, O, always listed in the same order. For example, a fertilizer with an analysis of 10-6-4 contains 10% nitrogen, 6% phosphorus, and 4% potassium. A 50-pound, 23 kilograms, bag of this fertilizer would contain 5 pounds, 2.3 kilograms, of nitrogen, 3 pounds, 1.4 kilograms, of phosphorus, and 2 pounds, 1 kilogram, of potassium. For trees, a complete fertilizer is often not necessary because nitrogen may be the only limiting element. Fertilizers are available in either an organic or inorganic form. Inorganic fertilizers release their elements relatively quickly when dissolved in water. Available nutrients in the form of inorganic ions are absorbed by oppositely charged sites on the root membrane. These same ions, when in excess concentration, are also responsible for plant burn by raising the osmotic potential of the soil and drawing water out of the roots. Organic fertilizers also release inorganic ions, but more slowly as materials decompose and molecules are hydrolyzed in the soil. Organic fertilizers are composed of carbon-based molecules and can be either synthetic or natural. Examples of synthetic organics are urea formaldehyde, UF, and isobutylidene diurea, IBDU. Examples of natural organics are manures, sewage sludge, fish hydrolysates, blood, and bone meal. Roots can absorb most elements only in the form of inorganic ions, whether coming from an organic or inorganic source. One advantage of organic fertilizers is that they must be converted to inorganic ions before absorption, therefore, they are not leached as readily from the soil. An advantage of inorganic fertilizers is that solubility is less affected by temperature. Especially for trees, it is desirable to use slow-release fertilizers, because they release nutrients, usually nitrogen, over an extended period of time. This reduces the amount of nutrients that may be leached and also reduces salt and fertilizer burn problems. If slow-release fertilizers are used, more nitrogen can be applied at one time. Slow-release fertilizers sometimes have a coating that breaks down slowly to release the inner fertilizer over an extended period of time. An example is sulfur-coated urea. Other slow-release fertilizers are synthetic or natural organics, whose release is determined by the carbon structure. Examples are urea formaldehyde, synthetic, or manures, natural. For long-term release of nitrogen, fertilize trees with a slowly soluble source with at least 50% of the nitrogen in the form of water-insoluble nitrogen, WIN, and a salt index below 50. Rates. The rate that the fertilizer should be applied depends on the age, health, and species of the tree, form of the fertilizer, method of application, site conditions, and the goal to be achieved. Because runoff from nutrient application can have a negative impact on water quality, fertilization has become a controversial subject, and some researchers are beginning to recommend lower rates than what have commonly been used. When the goal is to maintain tree health and supplemental nitrogen is needed, a general recommendation for slow-release fertilizers is 2 to 4 pounds, 1 to 2 kilograms, of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, 100 square meters, of root area. In most cases, fertilizer rates should not exceed 6 pounds, 3 kilograms, per 1,000 square feet, 100 square meters, per year. Use quick-release fertilizers only when the objectives of fertilization cannot be met with slow-release fertilizers. Rates should be between 1 and 3 pounds, 0.5 and 1.5 kilograms, of actual nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, 100 square meters, per application and should not exceed 4 pounds, 2 kilograms, of actual nitrogen annually. If the fertilizer is being broadcast over tough grass, apply no more than 3 pounds, 1.5 kilograms, of soluble nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, 100 square meters, to avoid damaging the tough grass. The rates provided here, however, are just general guidelines. The best approach is to create a fertilizer prescription based on foliar, soil, and pH analysis. Timing. Regardless of when fertilizer is applied, it may not be readily absorbed or utilized until root growth begins. Uptake and metabolic demand are low in the dormant season, and some of the more soluble forms of nitrogen may leach from the soil before it can be utilized. Studies show that nitrogen uptake peaks during the spring and summer when metabolic need is greatest. The most limiting factor in fertilizer uptake is water availability. Fertilization studies on mature trees show that response is greatest when moisture levels are adequate. The frequency of application depends on the tree, soil conditions, and fertilizer type. Clay soils have a higher cation exchange capacity, CEC, which means they can readily attract, adsorb, and exchange positively charged minerals. In sandy soils, smaller amounts of fertilizer may need to be applied more frequently than in clay soils because of a greater possibility of leaching. Another option for sandy soils is to use a slow-release fertilizer with a high water-insoluble nitrogen (WIN) content. Application techniques. In surface application, the fertilizer is applied over the soil surface using a spreader, dry formulations, or a sprayer, liquid formulations, calibrated to apply the desired amount of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet, 100 square meters. Depending on the fertilizer type, the area may need to be thoroughly watered following application to dissolve the fertilizer and to wash it off the grass and into the soil. These are some advantages to surface application of fertilizer to trees. It requires the least amount of time for application. It does not require sophisticated equipment. It delivers nitrogen to the upper surface, and, if there is enough water applied, it may penetrate into the upper 6 inches, 15 centimeters, of soil, where most of the tree's actively absorbing roots are located. A disadvantage of surface application is the potential for volatilization or for runoff into nearby rivers and streams, which contaminates the water. Therefore, do not employ surface application where runoff is a problem. When trees grow in a lawn, tough grass will compete significantly for available nitrogen. Although tree roots may get some benefit, turf roots will out-compete tree roots in absorbing essential minerals. In these cases, some arborists prefer to use one of the subsurface application techniques. Subsurface application is designed to place fertilizer below the majority of the tough grass roots. Keep in mind, however, that the majority of the fine, absorbing tree roots are located in the upper inches of the soil. The drill hole method uses granular fertilizer, and one advantage of this method is that it partially aerates the soil. Drill holes 2 to 4 inches, 5 to 10 centimeters, in diameter, spaced 12 to 36 inches, 30 to 91 centimeters, apart, into the soil around the tree in concentric circles or in a grid pattern. It is best to begin the holes several feet out from the trunk to avoid damaging the butt truss roots. Extend the holes at least to the drip line. Although property lines, pavement, and buildings of 10 restrict the application area, do not compensate for a restricted application area by drilling more holes in other areas. Do not poke or punch fertilizer holes into the soil because it causes compaction and glazing around the holes, which may restrict distribution and uptake of the fertilizer. Drill the holes 4 to 8 inches, 10 to 20 centimeters, deep, depending on soil type and other site conditions. Calculate the amount of fertilizer required, then uniformly distribute the fertilizer in the holes, but do not fill the hole completely with fertilizer. Leave the top 2 inches, 5 centimeters, empty. Backfilling the holes with a soil amendment such as compost, peat moss, perlite, crushed stone, pea gravel, or sand is optional. A third application technique is liquid injection fertilization. Fertilizer dissolved or suspended in water is injected under hydraulic pressure into the soil using a soil injector. The hole spacing and distribution are the same as with the drill hole method. Often, the factor limiting fertilizer uptake is lack of available water. The advantages of this method are better distribution and uptake of fertilizer, because water is injected into the root zone. For liquid injection, distribute the holes uniformly within the fertilization area. The concentration and application rates of the solution should be determined based on the required nutrients and rate of application. Because most of the absorbing roots are found in the upper inches of the soil, that's where application should be focused. Both the drill hole method and the liquid injection method of fertilization can lead to dark, vigorous patches of lawn under the tree around each distribution site. Some arborists use subsurface methods in conjunction with broadcast fertilization. This eliminates uneven discoloration in grass and provides the advantages of each application technique. However, the total amount of fertilizer applied should not exceed standard recommendations. Foliar application, another method of fertilization, is sometimes employed to correct minor element deficiencies. For example, chelated iron sprays may be used to provide a rapid, although temporary, treatment of iron chlorosis. However, this method is not efficient for introduction of other essential elements such as nitrogen. Micronutrient spray applications are most effective when made just before a period of active growth. Response time varies, but 1 or 2 applications per year will usually be effective. Not all plant species respond to foliar treatments, though. Because of the possibility of staining, care must be taken around hardscape and other finished surfaces. Implants and injections are 2 techniques employed to introduce chemicals directly into the xylem of trees. Implants, such as capsules and some injections, rely on the transpirational stream to move materials systemically within the xylem. Some injection techniques involve supplemental pressure to reduce injection time. Implants and injections have been used successfully to introduce essential elements into trees to treat micronutrient deficiencies, but they are not practical for supplementing macronutrients because of the volume required. As with foliar sprays, these techniques are most successfully used to correct minor element deficiencies. Do not use implant or injection treatments on drought-stressed trees, because uptake and distribution is best achieved when the tree is actively transpiring. To minimize injection wounding, drill small, clean holes close to the base of the tree at the root flare. To reduce chances of a blockage that inhibits uptake, make the insertions soon after drilling. Place implants or make injections below the bark and cambium, directly into the first rings of the xylem. Injecting directly above or below other wounds may cause severe injury, thus, do not reuse injection wounds from previous applications. Do not treat trees less than 4 inches, 10 centimeters, in diameter with implants or injections. Many experts are hesitant to recommend implants or injections because of possible damage to the cambium or xylem. Although treatments using systemic injections may yield remarkable results, repeated use can cause wounds to fuse. Therefore, do not administer implant or injection treatments less than 1 year apart. A minimum of 2 years is preferred. These techniques can be a temporary treatment, but they are not recommended for routine use. Apply them only when soil application techniques are impractical or ineffective. Soil and plant uptake. Some organic mulches can improve plant health and growth and may decrease the need for fertilization. As organic mulch decomposes, it can release essential elements into the soil. Long-term benefits provided by organic mulches include improved soil structure, increased water and nutrient holding capacity, and improved aeration and water infiltration. A number of products are available and marketed as soil additives. Soil additives range from various forms of organic matter to vitamins, mineral elements, and seaweed. Some additives have the potential to improve soil biology and structure, providing indirect benefits for the health of the tree. Unfortunately, little research is available on the efficacy of some of these products, and, in some cases, there is limited evidence of their value. One popular group of additives is soil inoculants. Recognizing the important role of mycorrhizae in water and mineral absorption, researchers have sought to encourage mycorrhizal development in tree roots. It should be clarified, however, that mycorrhizae are the result of a symbiotic relationship between tree roots and specific fungi. Mycorrhizae cannot be added to the soil, but the soil can be inoculated with spores and hyphae of mycorrhizal fungi. The goal is to introduce the fungal inoculants, which might in turn form mycorrhizae. Mycorrhizae are influenced by soil pH, light, minerals in the soil and plant, and other competing mycorrhizae and soil microbes. Therefore, inoculation should be adapted to match the plant species and site as much as possible. Although inoculation has been very successful in poor soils where fertility and microbe populations are low or non-existent, fewer benefits have been shown on more favorable soils. Recommended fertilizer rates are based on achieving a good tree response while avoiding fertilizer burn. Fertilizers, especially inorganics, are actually salts of different chemicals that are essential for plant growth and health. Fertilizer burn is the same type of injury that can be caused by common salt, sodium chloride, used for de-icing. Excessive salinity in the root zone can actually draw moisture out of the roots. Symptoms range from wilting and marginal burning of the foliage to death of the plant. Some fertilizer labels specify the salt index, which is a relative scale, compared with sodium nitrate, that indicates the likelihood to cause burning. A fertilizer with a salt index below 50 is usually preferred. The use of slow-release fertilizers can minimize salt injury. Under normal conditions, that is, no drought or flooding, water held within the soil pore space is readily accessible to plant roots. Although plant tissues may contain more than 80% water, their roots are able to maintain a lower water potential than the surrounding soil by accumulating solutes, salts, within their cells. If fertilizer is applied excessively or without proper irrigation, the concentration of salts within the surrounding soil may be much greater than the concentration of solutes, salts, found in the root cells. This leads to a phenomenon known as reverse osmosis, in which water is drawn out of the roots. If steps are not taken to correct these conditions, the plant will experience root burn. Leaching is the washing of chemicals down through the soil. Normally, nitrogen and other water-soluble elements are continually being leached from the root zone. Not only does this make nutrients unavailable to the tree, but the leached nutrients can also pollute groundwater, lakes, and streams. To minimize leaching, apply only the amount of fertilizer needed, use organic or slow-release forms, and avoid over-irrigating sandy soils. Another factor that may limit uptake of certain elements is pH. Soil pH can influence solubility of certain elements by causing them to form insoluble salts. For example, if the soil is too alkaline, iron solubility is reduced and iron is unavailable to the tree. Thus, adding iron to the fertilizer will provide only temporary relief, because the added iron will soon become unavailable. Therefore, it is advisable to perform foliar and soil analyses before treatment. Analysis and prescription. Prescription fertilization is the philosophy of basing fertilization recommendations on plant needs, which are primarily determined by soil or tissue testing. The most accurate way to determine the nutrient needs of a tree is to obtain laboratory analyses of the soil and leaves. Therefore, two analyses should be considered: soil analysis and foliar analysis. A soil analysis can give information about the presence of essential elements, soil pH, organic matter, and cation exchange capacity, CC. The pH and salt content levels, especially in arid regions, are crucial for recommending fertilizer treatments. A texture analysis, which determines the amount of sand, silt, and clay present in the soil, is also useful in assessing the physical characteristics of the soil. When sampling the soil around the tree, take small cores from representative locations of the entire area or root zone and then mix the cores together. The goal of this procedure is to avoid pockets where levels may vary. Any soil test is only as good as the sample, therefore, it is important to collect a representative sample of the site. Because tree roots grow over a vast area and at various depths, soil analysis alone may not yield accurate results. For certain soil, there is still debate about which elements. Also, levels of various elements are critical for tree growth, and required levels vary by tree species. To help diagnose certain deficiencies or toxicities, collect leaf samples for a foliar analysis from all over the tree, dry them, and have them analyzed. Interpretation of foliar analysis results should account for seasonal and species fluctuations in foliar nutrient content. Comparing foliar analysis results of both healthy and symptomatic trees of the same species may facilitate result interpretation. A soil analysis or foliar analysis alone can be misleading, though. Certain nutrients might be plentiful in the soil, but unavailable for plant uptake due to the soil pH and other factors. Although some fertilization can increase growth, it is not always beneficial. Excess fertilization can injure trees and reduce tolerance to certain stress and/or pest problems. Studies now show that nitrogen fertilization can trigger a tree's energy allocation toward growth, sometimes at the expense of defense. Even though fertilization is often recommended to help give ailing trees a boost, trees stressed by drought, poor soil aeration, and some diseases may not respond to fertilization. Nutrient management should consider soil structure and biology, not just soil chemistry. Fertilization is just one plant healthcare treatment available to arborists. Current practices are moving toward what is known as prescription fertilization, based on element analysis. This is an apt term, keeping in mind the medical saying, "prescription without diagnosis is malpractice."